thank you for that wonderful introduction. It was nice and sweet and short. Oftentimes you attend an event and the bio of the speaker will be in the booklet. It could be a page long, a paragraph long, or 2 pages, and the person doing the introduction would decide to read the whole thing. And I'm glad that didn't happen tonight. I want to thank Raul Cunningham. Let's give him a hand. I think he stepped out. He is truly committed to the association. Raul and I, we met in 2000 doing a voter empowerment program when then Mr. Cofield put him over to Kentucky to run the program. And we've been friends ever since, and I was pleased to see him elected to the National Board of Directors, where he represents Kentucky with distinction. And to John Johnson. Amen. You know, NAACP, we can be a rough sport on a national level. We play hard. I can say with all true honesty, my involvement in the NAACP was one in which I would sit back and watch the room. I was a student at Tougaloo College. I would attend the meetings with Dr. Henry, who was the state president for Mississippi, and I was the state youth president. And at that time, I had no concept of NAACP or any concept of what it took to lead. I was a student who grew up in Detroit with a 1.8 GPA. I had a ball in high school. And I got involved with the NAACP because of Dr. Henry's daughter. I was going to study in the girls' dorm room, and there was no co-ed visitation, and I got caught going into the room. They had better lighting in the girls' dorm. And Dr. Henry's daughter, Rebecca Henry, was over the dorm, and as I was pleading my case, because I knew if I got kicked out of the dorm, that meant I had to go back to Detroit, she said, well, you need to do something. Get involved in NAACP. I said, sure, how do I do that? And it was from that point, when she introduced me to her father, Dr. Henry, I got involved, and I would go to these national conventions. These men and women would meet before the meeting. To plan the agenda.
Yes, sir.
Because they were focused on what should happen, and there were some counter forces who had a different idea. And some of those counter forces who sat around the table of the board were being influenced by individuals and entities that came from outside of our community. Sometimes when we fight, we have to fight those who are outside of our community as we fight the folks in our community. And I would sit there and Dr. Hooks and Aaron Henry and T.H. Poole and Gibson, and they were Plot and Rupert Richardson from New Orleans with this sweet voice.
Yes, sir.
And they would plan it out. But John Johnson was one of the guys in the room who understood how to carry it out. Yes, sir. And in many ways, he put the bling in the NAACP. Because if you see our logo and our branding, and in any of the pictures, it's because John knew how to position us to project. Amen. Project even when we were weak.
Well,
he knew how to position us in the camera to project strength.
well.
And so for that, I do appreciate all that you've done for the association. All that you've done for the association. And it's important because in this rough sport we call NAACP, we don't always say thank you. Yes, sir. Amen. But we need to say thank you. To Bonnie Walker, who was one of my bosses, NAACP is one side of my development. The other side of my development was politics. And when this supervisor who represented a county in Mississippi decided to run for Congress, I was called and said, you're going to help Supervisor Thompson. He's running for Congress. I said, I don't know, who was he? And the person on the other end of that phone body was Norman Dorsey, who also used to work. He said, look here, boy, you a Tougalooan, he's a Tougalooan, we're going to help each other. Be outside when this car come pick you up. I said, okay. And I got there, and I was one of the first people who were part of that planning for Supervisor Thompson, who's now U.S. Congressman Thompson.
That's right.
Bonnie Walker was his first chief of staff. So when I took off a year from law school to go work for Congressman Thompson while he was my boss, and she didn't know my name for a couple of months. My name was Go Get It. Did you? Why didn't you? Don't do that again. But later she learned my name. And I appreciate her friendship and that opportunity during my early development. Chief of Staff Iris Sims is here. Iris, raise your hand. And to the security team, you don't have to raise your hand because somebody may be looking. I don't want you to know that y'all looking at them. You know, it's funny, when I took the position, I was told that there were certain events I had to have security. I said, I don't need no security. Nobody know who I am. Nobody care who I am. I'm just me.
Well.
But looking at the most recent events, you can't take things for granted.
That's right.
Amen.
That's right.
You know, women tell me what to do all the time. So when my wife tells me to go to Kroger, I go to Kroger. But I heard what happened here last night. We can't take things for granted. So I want to appreciate the security team, some of who live here, but also the team that have to travel with me. This current political reality is one in which we must address. And I want to let you all know, Raul told me, because I asked him how much time I had, he said, just don't go any longer than Aretha Franklin's funeral. So I want to ask that. Is one in which we must pay attention to.
Amen.
It's a political landscape that was born out of the politics of racial division, the politics of tribalism, the politics of intolerance. We began to see it emerge, particularly after the election of President Barack Obama.
Yes, sir.
The politics of intolerance was fueled by this television entertainment network that some of y'all call Fox News. It is definitely as sly as a fox, and there is no news worthy of listening to or watching on that channel. It is the politics of division and fear. The politics that will cause individuals to vote against their interests. But for black folks in this room, we've seen this before. You know, Kentucky is one of those unique states. There were 11 states of the Confederacy, and Kentucky decided to join the Confederacy after the Civil War had ended.
Amen.
Let that marinate for a minute. No, Kentucky didn't join the Confederacy.
Well.
It was not one of the original 11 states. It joined after the Civil War ended. See, Kentucky was no different than the southern states that succeeded, because those southern states, just like Kentucky, thrived off of cheap labor.
Yes.
But the only difference between those states and Kentucky, the individuals who were providing the cheap labor in those other 11 states were primarily African American, but in Kentucky they was exploiting white folks just like they was exploiting black folks. See, whether it was in the Carolinas, in the tobacco fields, or in Florida, in the sugarcane, or in Mississippi picking cotton, in Kentucky it was about the coal.
Same.
People not caring about others, they were only caring about profit. And see, the Civil War was not fought over the question of slavery. Oftentimes we get caught up in this notion that the war was fought over the rightness and wrongness of the institution of slavery. The Civil War was fought over money. We've seen this before. See, when the rich white guys in the North decided they want to change our economic system to a industrial-based economy, the rich white guys in the South said, y'all done lost your mind. We're making too much money to change anything. Amen. And that conversation turned into a debate. That debate turned to a fist fight that came in the summer. That fist fight emerged into this concept of seceding from that union. Those articles of secession were seen as declarations of war. That declaration of war was about money.
Well,
That's right.
It was not about the rightness and wrongness of how this nation was treating human beings. I almost slipped up and said how they was treating citizens.
well,
Because for most of us that was in the middle of this rich white man's fight, we were not even citizens, including the white folks in Kentucky. See, race is a social construct that has always been used by those in power to create division so they can maintain control. I know you didn't come here for a history lesson, but if we don't understand how we got here, we won't recognize how to address it. And so in that tug of war and using race as a construct, got to recognize as I look around this room, many of you who are not African Americans would not have been considered white not too far long ago. See, the only people in this country that was considered white during this time was white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So you was of Irish descent, you was not considered white. If you was Italian, you were not considered white. If you was Polish, you were not considered white. And believe me, if you was working in the coal mines in Kentucky, you were not considered white. It's a social construct to maintain domination and control. And as those individuals were fighting over the question of modes of production and what public policy would drive that conversation, people became pawns in that game. We've seen this before. And as a result of individuals taking up arms and reinforcing Sherman's army, so we fall into this false narrative that Lincoln freed slaves. Lincoln was presiding over a Union army that was about to lose the Civil War until Grant and Sherman gave a report of this phenomenon that every time they would go through and they would defeat Confederate soldiers, these individuals, these properties, contraband as we were known, would take up arms and reinforce them. And as a result of that, Sherman was able to continue to advance and as a military strategy. They decided to give Jefferson Davis this threat that if you don't surrender, we're going to issue this document. And Jefferson Davis said, we're not going to surrender. They issued the document, Emancipation Proclamation, but the document was really a paper tiger because those Africans were already picking up arms and reinforcing Sherman's army. See, Lincoln didn't free slaves. Those Africans saved the Union. Perspective matters. Who tells the story matters. And why am I talking about this is because we have the power today as we did to defeat the hate that had permeated the land. It's important. But not only did those Africans, they were not slaves, they were Africans. Why Africans? Because they knew they came from a continent. Why Africans? They didn't know what country they came from because it was a strategy to keep them separate. Why Africans? Because people are not slaves, they are enslaved. But those Africans, when they took up arms and they defeated the Confederate soldiers, the reward for that was the passage of the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment, which liberated those human beings who were from the continent of Africa, now American citizens. Now that's why we call ourselves African Americans. We were able to participate, but that liberation also extended to the coal mine workers in Kentucky and in West Virginia. See, West Virginia was created as a result of whites in those northern Virginia counties saying, we're not going to succeed with you, Virginia. We're going to organize our own state. And that's how West Virginia was created. So for the first time, people were being liberated under a concept that we actually could participate as full citizens. But the problem was white women couldn't vote. Black men could vote before white women could vote. It wasn't until the 1920s that white women were able to cast the ballots. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment allowed black men in the South for the first time to fully participate, but white women across the country couldn't participate. Where am I going with all of this? You didn't come here for a history lesson. See, in a democracy, our vote is our currency. In this game of denying certain people based on how they align from voting but permitting others to vote is a game of power. And hate has always been used as the tool to fuel division. And just like in 1860 and 61, the policy debate was about modes of production and allocation of taxes, it is the same debate we see today. See, one thing I will never be accused of, I will never be accused of being this phenomenal inspirational speaker.
Doing all right.
I won't be accused of it because I think it's demeaning when you have all the cuteness of a speech and it's void of substance, of knowledge, but when people leave the room, they have nothing to go on. It is important for us as NAACPers to understand the fight we're in, and it must be rooted in the history that brought us here.
Well,
the public policy debate has always been around who gets taxed, who's not taxed, and who will make the decision on how the tax dollars will be spent. It's that simple. When you're talking about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, it's about who gets taxed and how those taxes are being spent. If you're talking about tax cuts for the top 1%, that's about who gets taxed and whether or not there's enough tax dollars to pave the roads that we're riding on or fix the bridges that need repair or to ensure our young children are provided with a quality public education.
yes.
See, the conversation on the table is all about the money. In a democracy, our vote is our currency, and anytime capitalism and democracy they're both on the table, and they're not the same. We live in a capitalistic country, but we are governed through a democracy. And when democracy is weak, capital exploit people for cheap labor. But when democracy is strong, it keeps capital in check and hold it accountable so we all can prosper. That's what's at stake. But the way you break down democracy so capital can exploit, you infuse it with division, and that division oftentimes rears head up as hate. So this year when we sat down around the board table, we began to talk about what is the appropriate thing for the NAACP. We said, you know, what we're seeing is the growing and acceleration of racial hatred. Not unlike what we've seen in the past. Started in 2008. Some of you, if I ask you a question, do you remember where you were that Tuesday in November?
Amen.
Around 10:30 at night. See the heads bob. I remember where I was. I seen grown men cry.
Yes, sir.
Amen. Amen.
I seen grown women shout. I seen children run up and down the hallway of the place where we were monitoring the election, filled with excitement of what the possibilities could be for them for the first time. I seen people recount all the times they said before a black man is elected to the White House, hell will freeze over. And I seen the devil just shaking through cold. We were proud proud. We were proud. We were happy. We seen something new out of all of the struggles, all of the years, from those African soldiers who picked up arms to reinforce under this concept that we could be a part of a more perfect union, to all of those freedom fighters who helped reorganize state constitutional conventions to create public education systems, all the way through to the many people who struggled from William Monroe Trotter and W. Du Bois, who pulled together a meeting in Niagara to create the NAACP, to Ida B. Wells, who's a newspaper writer, a reporter, reporting on what was taking place, all the way through to A. Philip Randolph, who, in my opinion, is the greatest civil rights leader that we've ever seen. That journey has been a hard journey for us. It's been a journey in which we had to lead with our heart and with our faith. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, we met thee. Lest our heart drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. The song, lift every voice, it is the Black National Anthem for a reason, because it really recounts the journey we had to take just to get to that point on that Tuesday in 2008 to feel that level of exuberance. But with every action, there's a reaction. And one of the people who was a part of Kentucky joining the Confederacy, Mitch McConnell, within a week, announced we're going to make him a one-term president. Within a week, announced a level of obstructionist that we had not seen since Storm Thurmond. Within a week, announced how he was going to block every federal appointment to the bench. Within a week, fueled the level of racial intolerance that we had not seen since the 50s and 60s. Within a week, your U.S. citizen within a week, by 2010, that strategy continued to block any meaningful piece of legislation. By 2010, they were able to thrive off the fact that too many of us don't vote during midterm elections. And they were able to take more than half of the governorships across the country. They took almost 2/3 of state legislative bodies across the country because it was low on the turnout. It all initiated because we celebrated and lost focus that the fight was continuing and not ending. And here we stand today. Bomb threats sent to former presidents' offices and houses and senators who speak up. We have individuals who will see this and discount it.
That's right.
You know, I actually did attend Aretha Franklin's funeral. I was there for 8 of the 10 hours. I wasn't there the whole 10 hours. And it was a beautiful occasion for majority of my 8 hours there. It was a celebration of her whole life. Yes, we know about all the beautiful music she sung, and we love the fact that she was a queen of soul. But the unique thing for me was to hear all the testimony about her as a person. Person after person will come up and give an account of how she would do things for people that no one else knew. You know, one person would say, you know, she would see television and the family get burned out, and there was a woman who worked for her, and she would call over there and give her some money and say, take this to that family to make sure they're okay. She would hear about a family who loved one had died and they didn't have enough money for the funeral. She would send the money to the funeral home to pay for the funeral. She would hear about young people success and show up at a graduation unexpected and sing in celebration of the young people. She would do stuff not for the recognition. They tell me that character is what you do when no one is looking in the middle of the night. Character is the thing that you do because it is part of who you are and you're not seeking recognition for. Character is what you do in the dark. But you are a character if you sit up at night and you're tweeting foolishness from the White House. And there's a difference between having character and being a character. See, being a character is when you see this level of intolerance and you fuel it by going to mass meetings and spewing out racial hate and divisive words, and you can tell a lie and keep a straight face and tell it again as if you never told the first lie to begin with. So we have to understand the difference between people who have character and people who are characters. And not get distracted by characters that we forget what's at stake. And what's at stake is November 6th, election. See, having character is making sure that not only we turn out to vote, that we go get 5 people to go to the polls as well. See, having character is making sure we stand up for our children's future when nobody else will. See, the health of any society is based on 3 simple metrics. Do we care for our elderly? Are we preparing our young people for a bright and prosperous future? And do we protect the rights of the disadvantaged, however we define disadvantage? And we got a lot of characters who call themselves Christians. And they do nothing through public policy to ensure a healthy society. We have a lot of people who want to be seen as a statesman, and they do nothing that statesmen like to ensure our children have a prosperous future. And we have a lot of people who claim to have character integrity, a whole political party, and use racial division to prey on the disadvantaged in ways in which none of us should ever participate in.
Yes, sir.
Last story, and I'm going to sit down because Raul said I'm coming up on my 10 hours. Now, I had a literature teacher, Mr. Simmons. He was a funny looking fellow. He had an afro, and he never picked this out of the afro. He wore glasses. And you didn't know it, but if he took off the glasses, at some point in his life, he had an accident. He had a glass eye. And you couldn't tell which eye was the real eye or the glass eye. And there were times when the glass eye would fall out of alignment from the real eye. I was like, oh, don't pick on Mr. Simmons. Mr. Simmons was perhaps one of my best teachers. Kind of teacher that he didn't take no stuff. That when you cross his classroom and you go through the threshold of the door, you sign it. Because you didn't want to be singled out by Mr. Simmons. Kind of classroom that when you left his class, there was no noise other than paper rattling or book bags closing until you cross that threshold. Then you begin to hear people talk again. He was a tough teacher. And in order to graduate, you had to pass Dr. Simmons' class. And it was a year-long literature class. And I was nervous. You know, my subject and verbs, they still be fighting each other. I didn't know what to do. I had to get in his class. I had to pass Dr. Simmons. I had to read Shakespeare. I could read Shakespeare and come up and say, I don't know what Shakespeare is talking about. How do thou love thee? What? But in Dr. Simmons' class, I began to understand Shakespeare and read poetry and really immerse myself in the substance of the class. That first semester, I did well. I had a B-. I was proud. I succeeded. See, when I get scared, I get to moving. See, fear is one of two things. It paralyzes you or propels you. It is the greatest, single most important, emotional motivator known to humankind. It either paralyzes you or emotes you. And for me in that class, I got to move and I studied, I dug deep, and I got my midterm grade back. I got a B-. I passed the first semester. I might graduate from college. Received my first grade after that second semester. It was bad. It was a D-. And I can recall when Dr. Simmons, he walked into the class. We all, like we always do, we get in, cross the threshold, we get quiet. And this particular day, he wasn't in class before us. He came in late, but we were sitting there quiet. And he walked in, he was visibly angry. Salt and pepper hair, afro, still one pick right there, glasses on. Had the papers in his arm, he passed the papers out, I get, oh boy, I got a D-. And he was frustrated, he was mad. And he looked around the class, and he snatched out his glasses. He said, some of you are resting on your laurels. But I can assure you they're not strong enough. And that eye was looking at me. I looked at my paper. He was he was talking to me. Class dismissed. Class got out, we walked out. No one said a word when we crossed the threshold this particular day. I felt bad. He talked about my D-. The young lady who sat on the opposite side of class with me, she was visibly upset. She said, you know, Dr. Simmons didn't have to bust me out like that. I said, huh? I said, you know, I didn't do well on that test, and he just kind of told me I was resting on my laurels. See, I was like, whoa, but I thought he was talking to me. Come to find out, one eye was looking over on this side, the other eye was looking over there. And the reason why no one was talking, because one of them eyes at some point was looking at somebody in that room. And we still don't know which eye was the real eye or the glass eye. When in fact, he was talking to all of us. And he's still talking to us today. We can't rest on our laurels. It's not strong enough. The journey has been hard for most of us in this room. Nothing has ever been guaranteed. Not even to be recognized as a human being. We have to fight and struggle for everything we have accomplished. Whether it's that job or our child's future, or to ensure our grandparents or grandparents can be provided with the medical attention necessary so they can live out the lean years of their life with some level of dignity and comfort. Freedom is a constant struggle. We can't rest on our laurels. We're not strong enough. Defeat, hate, vote is in the center of that conversation. See, because for black folks, we can't rub this off. Nor should we want to. But we also recognize that people use this as a line of division to create otherness when otherness should not exist. See, otherness can be based on race or religious belief or sexual identity. Otherness can be created for many, many reasons. It is our job to not fall prey to the otherness argument and lose focus on what's at stake. And I don't care if you were part of the Jewish community. At one point, you was considered other. If you was Italian, you was too dark to be a WASP, and you was Catholic. Therefore, you was not considered white. If you was female, you was seen as only as a helpmate, and how dare you consider being paid equal to men. See, otherness it is repackaged and regenerated all the time. It is the role of the NAACP to remove the otherness and get to the substance of the opportunity and the quality of life that every human being should deserve. It is our job to lead from this banquet, to ensure that we turn out to the polls, that we're not fooled with the tricks of characters, who lack the character to qualify for our vote.
Well,
We're the NAACP. We were founded to improve the quality of life of our community because we understood if we didn't do that, who else will? Proverbs 31:8, who will speak for those who cannot speak for themselves? It is our charge to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. So continue to do the fight of the NAACP. Continue to uplift what all of our ancestors created for us to be here today. As I learned how to say the name of the city, Louisville. In Louisville,
That's better.
there are children who are dependent on you, NAACP, for their future. In Louisville, there are some elderly folks who depend on their Medicare, their Medicaid. In Louisville, there are communities who have been treated as other that we need to bring back into the conversation for the human beings they are. In Louisville, continue the fight to defeat hate, and let's turn out and vote.